What's going on, everybody? We're back in the garage today. Today we're going to get some stuff done on the Integra. Car's been sitting around quite a bit. I've been pretty busy working on the Civic. Video to come on that. Working on getting a new engine together for that car. As you can see, the Integra's kind of turned itself into a bit of a shelf for Civic parts, but that's going to change today. We're working on the rear suspension, starting off with the rear trailing arms. Not sure if we're going to do multiple videos or not, but at least to start off with, we have some Hone Developments trailing arm reinforcement gussets. These are a really good part to have on a car with a lot of grip, because a lot of the time the control arm likes to crack up in here and right here. These gussets are welded to the trailing arm right about here. You got to bend them a little bit to make them fit, but stiffens the trailing arm up quite a bit, keeps them from bending under high load from grippy tires. Big thanks to Hone Developments for sending these parts out to me. One of many of their parts that's going to be featured on this car. So let's get into it. When you order these, they just come bare like this. Just get the two of them, one for left, one for right. The dimples face inward towards the trailing arm, and they weld onto the back side of them just like that, using this hole to locate them. This is for the e-brake cable. I am keeping e-brake in this car, so gotta make sure that I don't cover that hole up. But I gotta get these trailing arms cleaned up. They're pretty nasty. They've been sitting under the car for some time, but we'll start off by doing that. We'll get this prepped up and we'll weld them on. Then I think we might even install them on the car today. Now that I've blown some of the dust off the trailing arms, I took some paint pen and I marked a general area of where I need to remove the paint from the trailing arm. You can see when I line this up, it sits about here. I'm going to go a little bit further than I think I'll need. It's not going to be a big deal. Rather have too much uncoated metal than not enough. We should be doing pretty good if I give myself like an extra ½ inch or so. But I need to remove all the paint along this surface, all the way up to where the toe arm bracket is. And I'm going to go all the way back to this green line. I'm going to start by getting all this bracketry and junk out of the way. I'm going to take the dust shields off these guys. They're not going to go back on, but should be pretty straightforward. Just need to make sure everything's lined up, and I'll cut back to you guys once everything's been ground down and it's ready to weld. So I got the trailing arm ground back to bare metal in the areas that I'm going to weld it all the way up to the front. I also took some of the coating off of the trailing arm reinforcement plate. I used a 4.5 inch flap wheel to do most of the work, and then I kind of tidied it up with a 2-inch Scotch wheel. I think we should be doing pretty good. Next step is I'm going to mark out where I need to stitch this thing in. You're supposed to do about a 30mm stitch with a 20mm gap in between. Hone provide a really nice drawing included with their install manual on their website to help you figure out where you need to weld this stuff in. Got to make sure you have clearance for this bolt hole as well as the little tab that goes in right here. They have 2 tabs just because you can flip this part and use it for both sides when they make it, depending on how they dimple die the thing. But I'm going to make sure this thing's all cleaned up. I'm going to mark out all the areas that I need to tack this thing in, and then we should be able to transfer this guy over the welding table and start tacking it in. I got all the areas that I need to weld roughly marked out. This isn't going to be perfect, doesn't have to be exact, but need to make sure you have a little bit of a gap. You don't want to overheat the metal, warp the trailing arm potentially. I'm going to hit the surface where I'm going to be welding behind with some weld-through primer, as well as the back of the trailing arm, just to prevent rust, anything weird going on back there. Really want to try and minimize the potential for that to happen. I'm going to hit it with some weld-through primer, let it dry out, and then I'm going to transfer it over to the welding table. I'll get it clamped up, and we're going to burn this thing in. So I got some weld-through primer sprayed on this thing, got it set up on the welding table. I'm using a bolt with a big washer to kind of locate the trailing arm gusset where the e-brake cable goes through, and I just got a clamp right here. I'm going to start welding down on the corner where the toe arm mounts and kind of work my way back and forth up. I'm going to have to clamp this in a couple different places to get this thing to sit flat. You can see it sticks out pretty far over here, but Today we're going to be using my Eastwood Mig 180. I picked this up a couple months ago. It was a pretty good deal. I think I got it for under $500 for just the welder. Since then I bought a cart, a gas bottle, helmet, the whole deal for this. So pretty satisfied with this welding setup, and this is going to be one of the first bigger projects that I'm going to tackle at home with my welder in the garage. So let's get started. I just went through and tacked the whole thing up. It was a little bit difficult getting it to fit, especially back here. I had to do a little bit of hammering to make it fit. I wish that I didn't have to do that, but looks like we should be all good as far as fitment goes. Fits up really well. This area right here looks like it's working out well. Next step is I'm going to have to just connect the dots between all my tacks. I marked out where I was going to weld and where I wasn't going to weld. So I'm not going to bore you with a time lapse or anything like that. I'll just cut back once I finish welding everything up. It's going to take quite a bit of time. I don't want to overheat the welder. It has a pretty low duty cycle. Here it is. Trailing arm is all welded up, reinforced. I'm really impressed with this Eastwood welder. They handle it pretty well. The duty cycle is a little bit low for how fast I want to get this done, but really no rush. I'm just an impatient guy. So I think the welds could have been better in some spots, but overall they're pretty solid. Like this one's pretty nice if I do say so myself. And I think this is going to add a lot of rigidity to the trailing arms. No cracking, no bending, no twisting, no weird stuff while I'm on track. So next step is to get this thing all wire wheeled down. I'm going to hit the whole thing with a fresh coat of paint, and I'll catch back up with you once we have that finished. All right, everyone, we're back in the garage. It's been a significant amount of time since I last filmed anything to do with these trailing arms. I got pretty busy with some other stuff. It took quite a while to get these things painted the way that I wanted to. So let's check it out, and we're gonna check out our next step in getting these trailing arms prepped, which is a set of PCI spherical bearings for the trailing arm bushing. So here's the trailing arm all finished up. I just hit it with some high solids flat black paint and masked off the little spindle. Everything else I just kind of bombed it on there, gave it a quick wire wheel. This paint's pretty good. It's resistant to like brake fluid and stuff like that. I really like the stuff. Use it for roll bars, things like that. But the next step is to install these PCI spherical bearings. They go in place of the rear trailing arm bushing like this. Obviously they sit in there flush. Kind of hard to do this with one hand, but pretty simple setup. All you got to do, set them in there, drill some 10mm holes, 3/8 for Americans, and bolt them in with these countersunk Allen bolts. Put in this little bar, goes across. The side that doesn't stick out so much goes facing the front, I guess. Arrow faces up. Super easy stuff. So I'm gonna get going on these using a transfer punch to mark out the hole that I need to drill, and then we'll drill them in, get them all lined up. So the way that we're going to start off doing this is I'm going to place this trailing arm bearing in the hole where it needs to sit. It's not a press fit, you can just pop it in there with your hands. And then I'm going to take a transfer punch, which is just a large punch with a point in the middle. This happens to be the one that fits through. It'll just drop right in, perfectly lined up with the hole. If you can see that, there's like minimal play. So this will give me the exact center of the hole. You can get this set at Harbor Freight for like under 20 bucks. Super solid thing to have, especially if you're trying to transfer a hole pattern to something else. So all you got to do, get this guy in here, line it up, whack it with a hammer, and you got two holes that you can start drilling for your pilots, and then you can upsize the hole to the size that it needs to be. I said 3/8 in the last clip. I'm not absolutely sure. 3/8 is a little bit smaller than 10mm, but I'm going to drill it out with a 3/8 bit and see if it fits through. I got the two holes drilled in the trailing arm. Ended up using a 13/32 drill bit. This guy right here. Pro tip with drill bits, buy these things. The Spider drill bit set. It's like a Lowe's exclusive item. At least that's where I've been able to find them. But these things are killer. Unfortunately, they don't go up to 13/32, but I ran it up to 3/8. Bolts didn't quite fit, so I ran it up to the 13/32 with these terrible Ryobi bits, but they did the job. These things stay sharp forever, and they're like 45 bucks for this set, which isn't bad. I think this set was about the same, and they're garbage. So now that it's drilled up to a 13/32, I can drop the countersunk bolt through with little effort, and the next step is to get the trailing arm bushing back on, bolt them down, torque them to 20 to 25 foot-pounds, and we should be all finished. I'm going to leave this little bar off to the side until it's actually time to put the trailing arm in the car, but I need to repeat this process on the second trailing arm, which is painted and ready to go over on another table. So here's the trailing arm bushing fully installed, and I can take my little bar and it drops in right through there. I'm going to leave it out, set this one aside, and I'll do this to the next trailing arm, and we'll be ready to move on to the next step. So now that we have the spherical rear trailing arm bushings installed, we're going to move on to the toe arms, which we need to install into the trailing arms before we install the trailing arms into the vehicle. Geez, mouthful. But these are some spherical toe arms from Hone Developments. Once again, big shout out to them. Huge supporter of the channel, huge supporter of all my cars, and very helpful, very knowledgeable, make some great stuff. So these are super simple. You can use these 2 bolts to loosen them and move each tooth to change the toe. These guys install facing logo towards the rear of the car, and they just slip in between just like a standard toe arm. Bolts need to be facing downwards, and you need to have this facing towards the rear of the car just so you can see what's going on. We also have some eccentrics for the rear of the vehicle, which I'm going to install once we get up under the car. So let's get these bolted on, and then I think it's time to put these trailing arms in the car. So here we are up under the driver's side of the car. Got our trailing arm here. I torqued the front of the toe arm to 40 foot-pounds as per the Honda manual. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to lift the trailing arm up into the car, bolt it down with these 2 17mm headed bolts. I think they're M12 thread. They bolt right in here, these 2 bolt holes, and then we're going to fish the toe arm into that little pocket. It gets torqued to 40 foot-pounds as well. I'll put the torque spec on screen for these bolts. I think it's like 60-something foot-pounds, but let's get this thing up in here. Definitely a 2-handed job, and then we'll get the rest of the suspension arms assembled. The trailing arm is bolted up into the car by these 2 bolts back here. I torqued them to 47 foot-pounds. 60 was not right, going by the Haynes manual. Next step is to crawl up under here and get these toe arms installed. They go right through this pocket like this, and I'll show you how the eccentric adapters bolt on over the top of the bolt for the toe arm. Gonna be a little bit hard to film, be crawling around on my back, but shouldn't be too bad to install. Hope I can show you guys how this works and how easy it is to put together. So here is the Hone Developments eccentric adapter installed into the, I guess this is not the subframe, this is the body of the Integra. But what it allows you to do is you're able to now take a 6mm Allen wrench, put it in here, and you're able to adjust your toe much easier. See how the toe arm's moving back and forth when I'm turning this? There's a little slot in the stock body location where the toe arm bolts, and this just goes over top of it and adapts it to become an eccentric. I'll show you on the bench once I finish torquing this guy down. The spec to this is 40 foot-pounds as well. I'm going to leave an Allen in it so I can just hold it centered. Doesn't really make that big of a difference. This thing's going to need a pretty severe alignment. It's going to be basically undrivable until I align it. So I'll get this torqued down and paint marked, and I'll show you how this thing works. Here's the Hone Developments eccentric adapter on the bench. Very simple design. This aluminum piece has a little ridge to it that sits into the slotted hole on the chassis. That goes on, and then this just bolts over the top of it, and as this rotates, it pushes the control arm forward and backward. Hopefully you can see how that works. But see where the hole is if I put it here versus here, the hole is significantly offset, and they just give you a little hex that you can put your Allen wrench into to be able to adjust the toe. So next up is the subframe brace from ASR. I haven't gotten a sway bar from them yet, but I will be going with a pretty nasty sway bar setup. So We're gonna get this on before we get the lower control arms on, just to make it a lot easier for me to get my hands up in there, but pretty simple stuff. Instructions are right here. Just use a couple bolts and spacers to stiffen the rear subframe up so I don't tear it with the big rear sway bar that we're gonna be getting for this car. Let's get this thing up on the car, and I'll show you once I'm done. It's gonna be pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory to do. Then after that, we'll get the lower control arms in. So here's the ASR brace all installed on the bottom side of the car. Next step for me is I need to get the control arms out, and I'm gonna get them fitted up here, all the way out to the rear knuckle. We should be good. I don't have any shocks right now, so I think I'm just gonna leave them loose. Not sure what I'm working with for bolts here either, so we'll get to it. But for now, subframe brace is in. I'm gonna have to remove these two bolts to be able to bolt a sway bar up, but should be no big thing. So here we have a Truhart lower control arm for the rear. This is with rubber bushings. I was advised by the guys at Honed not to run a poly or spherical rear control arm just because it increases the likelihood of cracking in the trailing arm or the chassis. So they know what they're talking about, so I listened to them. Got these guys. These are pretty inexpensive. I think they're around 130 bucks. They have sway bar provisions, 3 positions, and should work pretty well. So we're gonna bolt it in here and here, assuming I have the correct bolts, and we should be good to go. So here's the Truhart control arm installed. Everything's loose, so I can still move the suspension around. Looks pretty good. I'll tighten everything up once I get a shock on there and I can put the car at ride height on some stands, get that all figured out. We're gonna move on to the upper control arm next, so I'll show you what I got. Once again, Hone Development's coming through with another great product. These are their upper camber arms for EG, DC, EF, EK, all the great 90s Hondas that we have. There's multiple positions using these spacers behind and these positioning blocks in the front. I'm just gonna run one spacer and run these guys in the middle because I have OEM geometry for now, and they say in the instructions to baseline the vehicle with just one shim. So I'm gonna get these guys installed in the car. It's really awesome that they include other camber shims just to be able to tune the car the way you want to, depending on your suspension geometry. These installed just like a regular camber arm. They have a ball joint. You don't have to worry about getting some weird bind effect when you go to torque down your jam nuts during an alignment. That's something that I've dealt with before on the Civic. I would tear upper camber arm bushings in the back just because of the way that I would torque them for the alignment. So let's get these guys thrown in the car. The bolts that go through here, I think the spec is like 30, 32, and then once again 40 foot-pounds on this bolt. So let's get them in the car. So here's the camber arm installed in the vehicle. Went right in just like a factory arm. 30 foot-pounds on these back bolts. Once again, 40 foot-pounds on this longer bolt that goes through the trailing arm. We're looking pretty good. That's all the arms that I have for the car for the moment. So I'm going to move on to putting a rear hub on this thing. I have new hubs with extended studs, so I'll get this tape peeled off and we should be ready to put a hub on it, torque it down, and then we're gonna have to repeat this whole process on the other side of the vehicle. So I just chucked a new hub on. This is a Mevotech standard replacement hub with some ARP extended studs. We're not gonna be using dust shields. I'm keeping the car 4-lug just because I think that there's more cost-effective brake options for 4-lug. I already have lots of 4-lug wheels, tires, all that stuff. So got it paint penned, got it staked, torqued it to 140 foot-pounds per spec. We'll see if this thing lasts. I think it should be pretty okay. Last thing I got to do is chuck a dust cap on it. We should be all set. Then I got to reassemble the other side of the car. It's buried over there behind the splitter, everything like that, and we should be all finished up with this video. So I just finished getting the passenger side of the car all assembled. It's way over here in the corner, so it's kind of hard to see, but same as the driver's side, everything's looking good. I had to not quite finish bolting the control arm up in the back just because I'm missing a bolt. I'm gonna go grab that at the junkyard tomorrow. I think that's gonna be it for this video. We made a lot of progress on the rear suspension. Just need to get some shocks and a sway bar in there and we should be good to go. But more things are coming soon for this car. I know it's been taking quite a while to get this thing rolling. With all these projects, it's kind of hard to budget for all of them, but things are happening. The engine should be getting ready to drop in the car here soon. Just need to get an oil pan for that and we should be good to go. But I think that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. As always, thank you for the support. Big shout out to Hone Developments, ASR, and PCI Racing for the parts. And I will see you guys in the next one.